The film begins with a young father, Charles Coleman, talking to his son CJ about his childhood hero, Muhammad Ali, who stood by everything he believed, even though it meant losing everything he worked so hard for. They play together momentarily before CJ hands his father a drawing of his family. As he admires his son's work, CJ asks whether black people are better than white people. Charles wisely tells his son that there are good and bad people, regardless of race. CJ's mother Eve then joins them after work. Charles is also a college law student struggling to keep up with schoolwork while parenting. The professor scornfully asks him to read a case aloud to his classmates as if he were in grade school. Years later, an all-grown-up CJ joins his parents for breakfast. It's CJ's first day at the police academy, and his parents are proud of him. Eve, who is now a police officer, hugs him and wishes him well before leaving for work. CJ and his dad tease each other back and forth before leaving. CJ takes one of his dad's cars and happily drives off. Charles meets his old friend Detective Horace, and they briefly talk about their children and their fears as parents to young adults. In another scene, Officer Vaughn plays with a group of black kids in a park and suggests to Officer Rory that he would love his son Carter to play with those kids. Rory lets out a racist response, telling him to find better kids to play with his son. As they leave, Vaughn asks about Rory's ailing father, and he says that his condition has not changed. Charles is a city judge and is presiding over a court proceeding involving a young black man who shows remorse for his actions. Although he does not give him probation, he gives him a house arrest, followed by a 2-year probation defense. CJ is driving while watching a video of his mother congratulating him. CJ sees Rory and Vaughn's patrol car and gestures to acknowledge them, but Rory interprets it as flipping. They start chasing after him, and he pulls over. At the traffic stop, they ask for his license, which he calmly reaches for in his bag in the back seat. This prompts Vaughn to think that he is reaching for a gun, and they both shoot at him for fear of their lives. After checking through his bag, they realize they made a mistake, and he was just reaching for his license. Rory immediately comes up with a plan to plant a gun on him to exonerate themselves of any wrongdoing. Eve arrives at the scene and is heartbroken to see his son dead. Judge Coleman goes to the morgue to view his son's body and is also devastated by his son's demise. Vaughn goes home that evening, and the guilt of covering up a murder has left a cloud hanging over his head as he watches his son fall asleep. Friends and family are gathered at Judge Coleman's residence, and he is too grief-stricken to join them. Before they go to bed, Eve declares that she is quitting her job since she cannot work in the same system that killed their son. He persuades Charles to leave his job, but says he's come too far to quit, noting that he is the only black judge the town has ever had. He further says that by being a judge, he stands to make a more significant change for the black community than if he quits. Eve, however, disagrees with him, saying that CJ was a good kid, but the system still killed him. In an auto repair shop owned by a man named Javier, a group of men bring in a wounded man, Diego. Diego has been shot for crossing over another gang's territory and is asking for help from Javier. Javier urges him to go to the hospital and promises to get him a lawyer and bail him out. The following morning, Charles hears on the radio that a Black Lives Matter campaign is being held to honor CJ, but he turns it off, saying that CJ is not a cause. Charles then meets Horace, who tells him it will be impossible to determine whether CJ had a gun. Charles is, however, relatively confident that his son did not have a weapon and is being framed. At the precinct, Rory urges Vaughn to stick to the story, pointing out that the truth will not bring CJ back to life. He justifies their actions by blaming CJ for reaching for his bag and instructs Vaughn to look out for himself. Rory then runs into Charles and shows no remorse for his actions. Vaughn joins them briefly with self-reproach and is devastated and short of words. Vaughn maintains his ground and remarks that he will not apologize for doing his job. Charles promises to use his resources to ensure he is punished for his actions. Vaughn then goes for his hearing and sticks to Rory's story about fearing for his life, hence pulling the trigger. Charles then goes to see the mayor, the DOJ Hinkle, and Mallard, the chief of police, regarding the investigation of officers Vaughn and Rory. Mayor Johnson tells him that they unanimously decided not to charge the police officers since there was no evidence implicating them in wrongdoing. DOJ Hinkle further says that the federal government had also signed off on it, and Chief Mallard adds that they all relied on the officers' testimonies. As part of the justice system, they encourage him to endorse this decision since the police cannot be punished every time they do their duty. The mayor then offers him a settlement, which Charles declines and leaves the room. Charles calls Horace and asks for help finding answers for Eve's sake. Horace works with internal affairs and accesses the file room to look into Vaughn and Rory. He finds some dirt on Rory, takes photos, and emails them to Charles. The files reveal a similar murder carried out by Rory, and Charles decides to visit the parents of the victim. He meets the mother, who gives him the location of her husband's auto repair shop, but is upset that he is asking about his late son. Javier is not so pleased to see a man digging around about his son's Ralphie murder. He breaks Coleman's window and attacks him, but Coleman tells him that he is just there asking for help. Javier calms down but tells Coleman that it will be almost impossible to sue the city and get justice since the police cannot snitch on each other. Coleman narrates that Eve got pregnant when they were 17, and he vowed to work his way up without giving up. Nonetheless, Javier is not convinced they could win and says he wants no part in it. The mayor's secretary informs the mayor that a reporter is asking for details about the murder, and the mayor gives the green light to publish the details. Meanwhile, Vaughn lets slip to his wife Mary that CJ did not have a weapon, which angers her. Mary tells him he must stop acting like a coward and own up to his mistakes. Vaughn says that Rory's plan and story protect them, but Mary tells him to stay away from her and their son Carter. Javier tries to bring himself to look at his son's photo, but cannot. The following day, Judge Coleman meets Marcy, a mother to another victim of police brutality. Marcy is not interested in pursuing justice and says she forgave those who killed him. She equates justice to an eye for an eye. In her opinion, a man serving years for stealing a loaf of bread is not justice. When she was 17, she was caught riding a stolen vehicle, and after taking a plea, she was deemed a felon. Her whole life she has missed out on opportunities such as employment and quality education just because of a mistake she made as a teenager. She pleads with Coleman to try and find peace within himself because once he is fixated on finding justice, he will forget how to live. Later that evening, Javier talks to his wife about their late son and tells her how much he misses him. He points out that he was wrong for not pursuing justice for his son, but his wife tells him that his son chose the gangster life for himself. At their home, Coleman treats his wife to Chinese food, and they savor every moment while listening to music. They then go to bed, as do Javier and his wife, indicating that both families have chosen to be at peace with their son's demise. 6 months later, both Coleman and Eve read the news that say CJ had a gun, implying that he was a thug. Eve confronts Charles for not doing anything to get justice for his son. She reminds him that he has consistently achieved everything he set his eyes on, including getting a degree, becoming a lawyer, and even becoming a judge. It is therefore hard for her to understand why it has been difficult for him to get justice for their son. Coleman sees the mayor, who denies knowing who leaked the news. Coleman then shows the mayor a photo of the gun that was found on CJ, pointing out that it was also found at Javier's son's crime scenes, with Rory being at both. The mayor tells him it is above him and cannot be proved. He also tells him that the city offered him money, but he declined. Later that evening, Coleman visits Javier and tells him they must do something since justice has been denied. He also tells him that his son Ralphie did not die in a gang rivalry, as the police indicated, but the police killed him. Javier still does not want to get involved, and he asks him to leave. Coleman tells him that the gun found on CJ was still the one found on Ralphie's crime scene before showing him footage of how his son died, and this upsets him. He points a gun at Coleman, saying he was also part of the system that denied justice to his son. Charles agrees that he also gave the justice system a chance, but it failed him, and now they have to take things into their own hands. With enough details about the officers, the two grieving fathers get ready to avenge their sons' deaths. Coleman gets a gun and takes CJ's drawing with him. Masked and armed, Javier breaks into Rory's house, where a hand-to-hand fight ensues. Rory subdues Javier, and Rory is about to shoot him when Coleman blasts in, shooting. When the shooting subsides, Rory tells Coleman that besides being taught how to choose the best Cuban cigar, his father also taught him that it is crucial to pick a side. He points out that since Coleman is a judge, they were on the same side, and had he known that CJ was his son, he would not have killed him. The shooting begins again, and Charles kills Rory. As they drive off, Coleman says their sons would be proud. Detective Horace arrives at Rory's house. After viewing the crime scene, description of suspects, and evidence of CJ's ID, he discovers that the shooter could be Coleman. He orders some officers to get Vaughn, who might be in danger. Unaware of what's happening, Vaughn hesitates to leave, but he is assured that an officer will watch over his family. Horace then calls Eve and asks her if she's seen Charles. Eve says that he is trying to do the right thing. At a red light, some detectives recognize them, and they are forced to drive off and flee. The detectives chase after them, and the chase ends in a warehouse. Javier and Coleman do not want to kill anyone, so they fight them off while telling them to stand down. As they exit, another detective shoots at them, but they tell her that her partners are injured but not dead, and they don't want any trouble. The officer lets them walk. They then steal a car and keep driving. As Vaughn is being escorted to safety, he questions the reason behind it. He is informed that a black male has killed Rory. Coleman then spots the police car transporting Vaughn, and they make a U-turn to chase after it. They hit the police car from behind and continue to pursue it on the busy highway. With the police shooting at them, Coleman and Javier continue to drive recklessly, causing them to lose control and crash. The officers protecting Vaughn get out of their car, but Javier and Coleman gun them down. A police helicopter has also caught up with them, but this does not stop them from getting to Vaughn. Coleman shows Vaughn CJ's drawing and tells him that he will be tried for his murder. While on his knees with the two fathers pointing guns at him, Vaughn begs them not to kill him since he has a son. Coleman tells him he had a son too, but he was taken away from him. Vaughn apologizes and tells Coleman that CJ did not have a gun, which tips Coleman over, and he shoots him. After that, the police at the scene immediately gun down Javier and Coleman. The movie ends with the police notifying Vaughn's wife about his husband's demise, the mayor watching the shootout on the news, and Eve trying to reach her husband.